Sometimes, what you lose reveals who you truly are. She was just a temporary secretary. He was the CEO everyone feared and no one really knew. But when Abby Caldwell accidentally left her private diary in the boardroom, Ann Thomas Whitaker, a man grieving a lost love and fighting silent battles at the top, picked it up and read her final line. Everything changed. In that moment, they were no longer boss and employee. They were two souls tangled in truth, betrayal, and choices that could cost them everything. What would you do if someone discovered your most vulnerable thoughts, then asked you to stand beside them in a war they could no longer fight alone? This is not just a story of corporate secrets or forbidden connections. It's about what happens when two people decide to stop disappearing and start telling the truth, no matter the cost. If this story stirs something in you, drop us a comment, share your thoughts, and follow our channel for more stories that speak to the heart. Now, let's go back to the day she lost the diary and everything quietly began. Some things, once lost, feel like they take a part of you with them. For Abby Caldwell, it was just a diary, but it held everything she hadn't dared say out loud in years. The morning light in Seattle crept in, slow, soft as fog, slipping through the slats of the blinds and falling in thin ribbons across Abby Caldwell's modest kitchen table. She wrapped her cold fingers around a chipped blue coffee mug, the one with a faded "World's Best Mom" print, and stared at the steam curling above it. The silence was warm for a moment, before the weight of the day settled back onto her shoulders, heavy, familiar, and unrelenting. It was Thursday. Another early shift at Rain and Ridge Partners. Another day of blending in, of keeping her head down, of trying to be invisible but useful enough to stay on the schedule. She rinsed her mug in the sink, glanced toward the bedroom where her daughter was still fast asleep, and quietly grabbed her worn handbag. She double-checked the usuals: phone, keys, inhaler for Maddie, wallet, lip balm, tissues, a crumpled grocery list, a letter from the hospital with a payment plan she still hadn't dared open. And then her hand stilled. The diary. It wasn't there. Abby paused, thinking maybe she'd left it in the living room. But no. She remembered tucking it carefully into her bag the night before, a habit she never broke. The diary was the only thing of her father's she had left, bound in soft brown leather, worn at the corners. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and old ink. He'd given it to her when she turned 18, told her that when life got too heavy to carry in her chest, she could carry it on paper. She carried it everywhere. It was hers, a small piece of stillness in a life that never stopped moving. And now, it was gone. A flutter of panic rose in her throat, sudden and cold. She dumped the contents of her purse onto the kitchen table. Her heart pounded as she rifled through receipts, crumpled tissues, an old granola bar, no diary, nowhere in sight. "Mama," a small voice called from the bedroom. Abby drew a deep breath, pushing the panic back where it came from. "I'm here, sweetheart. Get your socks on. I'll walk you to the bus stop in 5 minutes." She helped Maddie with her backpack, kissed her on the forehead, and stood on the sidewalk watching her disappear down the street with a lump in her throat. Then she turned toward the city. Rain and Ridge's building rose like a sculpture of glass and steel against the soft gray sky. Abby moved through the lobby like a shadow, nodding politely to the receptionist, keeping her coat buttoned up tight. She took the elevator to the 14th floor, the executive floor where everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and something colder, quiet ambition. Her desk was tucked near the side hallway, just outside the conference rooms, a place convenient for errands but far enough from the boardroom to be forgotten. She set her things down gently and opened each drawer, hoping, praying. But her hope dissolved as quickly as it came. The diary wasn't there either. Abby leaned back in her chair, her breath shallow. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't have lost that. She tried to retrace her steps. The day before had been long. She'd stayed late, finishing minutes from a meeting, then printed the client portfolio that Thomas Mr. Whitaker she reminded herself had requested for the next day. She remembered taking a few moments in the quiet conference room when the office emptied out. The late sunlight had come in low through the tall windows, making everything look softer, kinder. She'd pulled out her diary, just for a moment, and wrote down what she couldn't say aloud, that sometimes, when she looked at Thomas Whitaker, she saw not power, but pain, that he moved through the office like a ghost among glass, and she wondered what haunted him. And then the printer jammed, and she rushed out without thinking. Her hands turned cold again. That room, the one on the top floor, the glass-walled conference room that only Thomas used now. She wasn't supposed to be in there outside of scheduled meetings, and she certainly wasn't supposed to leave anything behind. She stood slowly, as if her legs no longer trusted her. Through the frosted panel across the hallway, she could see the tall door at the end of the corridor. It was closed now, quiet as a confession. Her breath caught in her chest as she stared at it. What if someone else had found the diary? What if Thomas had? What if he had opened it and read the last line? The one she had written hurriedly, stupidly, vulnerably, just the evening before. Sometimes I think I see in his eyes the same kind of loneliness I carry in mine. She closed her eyes, dizzy with dread. It was just a diary, but it held every unsaid thought, every private fear, every fragile truth she never meant to share. And now it was missing. Possibly read, possibly not. But either way, no longer just hers. She turned her gaze again toward the door of the conference room, her hands trembling against the edge of her desk. It stood silent, locked in its own quiet power, as if holding a secret. And somewhere deep inside her, Abby felt it. Something had changed. What if he read it? The thought echoed louder than her heartbeat. He was the kind of man you only saw from behind a glass wall, composed, powerful, untouchable. But Abby had noticed the cracks. Rain and Ridge Partners was a place of precise lines, tall glass walls, polished floors, brushed steel accents. Every detail was curated, intentional, much like the man who built it. Thomas Whitaker didn't walk through the halls like the other executives. He moved like something apart from the rest, as if the weight of his thoughts kept him a few steps removed from the world around him. People whispered his name in elevators, adjusted their posture when he passed, but no one truly saw him, except, perhaps, Abby. She'd never meant to notice him the way she did. It happened slowly, over months in between coffee runs and copy jobs, behind quiet glances through half-closed doors. Thomas Whitaker, 44, gained his first million by 30, lost his wife by 39, built an empire not with charm, but with clarity. People said he was cold, controlled, untouchable. But Abby had seen something else. It was in the way he looked at the city skyline during late hours, long after everyone else had gone. How his fingers sometimes lingered on the edge of his wedding band, which he no longer wore but still kept in his desk drawer. How he paused, just a second longer, when passing the framed photo of a woman with auburn hair and soft eyes that sat on the corner of his shelf. That was his wife. She had passed from cancer, someone once whispered to Abby, quietly, dignified. He hadn't spoken about her since. He rarely spoke at all, unless the words served a purpose. But Abby believed in the language of small things, and Thomas Whitaker spoke that language better than most, even if he didn't know it. She remembered, months ago, when her shoe had broken near the back staircase. She had crouched down, flustered, fumbling with a paperclip to keep the strap together. He had passed without a word. But 15 minutes later, a new pair of flat black shoes had been quietly left by her desk. No note, no receipt, just her size and silence. That's the kind of man he was, kindness buried beneath steel. And now, that man might have read the last page of her diary. The thought made Abby's chest tighten as she sat at her desk, pretending to type, though her fingers hovered above the keys without movement. The memory of that sentence burned behind her eyes, the one she wrote the night before, when she'd let her guard down, when she'd written not about reports or worries, but about him, Sometimes I think I see in his eyes the same kind of loneliness I carry in mine. What had possessed her to write that? And worse, to leave it behind. She looked up toward the frosted glass wall that separated her hallway from the conference suite above. His office, more of a private wing, really was there. No one went in without invitation, not even senior partners. Her cheeks burned, not from guilt, exactly, but from the intimacy of being exposed, of being seen. When she hadn't given permission, what would he think of her now? A silly woman with too much imagination, a liability, a risk, or worse, would he see the truth in her words? Abby swallowed hard, her eyes still locked on the quiet hallway. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate. She heard her name, not loudly, just enough. Miss Caldwell. Mr. Whitaker would like to see you. It was Denise, his longtime assistant. Abby stood up too quickly, her legs stiff from sitting still so long. She smoothed the front of her blouse, hoping her heartbeat wasn't visible through the fabric. The hallway to the top floor felt longer than usual. The walls echoed the click of her shoes, too loud in the quiet. When she reached the final door, it opened without a sound. The room was just as she remembered, floor-to-ceiling windows, a long walnut table, polished to a mirror finish, a few modern paintings abstract, muted in color. Everything minimal, everything controlled, except for one thing, her diary. It sat in the center of the table, neatly closed. The leather cover seemed older now, more fragile somehow, like it had aged overnight under someone else's gaze. Thomas stood near the far window, hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed but unreadable. The skyline stretched behind him, gray and silver, streaked with morning clouds. He didn't look at her right away. Abby stayed by the doorway, uncertain whether to speak. Finally, he turned. His expression revealed nothing, neither warm nor cold, just steady. He gestured, lightly, toward the table. She took a tentative step forward. Her eyes flicked to the diary, then back to him. The silence was unbearable, not sharp, not cruel, just full. Finally, he spoke the words quiet, almost absent-minded. "We'll talk tomorrow. 8 that was all. No reprimand, no questions, no mention of what had been read, or how far." Abby nodded once. She turned, her fingers itching to grab the diary, but unsure if she had permission. But before she could reach for it, he had already walked back toward the window. Dismissed. Back at her desk. She sat motionless for a long while, staring at the screen she hadn't touched all morning. Her thoughts weren't just tangled, they were loud, jostling for space inside her chest. What did that mean? Did he read it all? Just the last page? Did he feel exposed too? Or was this just the beginning of something she hadn't even dared imagine? The screen on her computer dimmed. Still. Abby sat there, eyes unfocused, hands still trembling, and in her mind, over and over, she replayed the only words he'd given her. "We'll talk tomorrow." 8, Some conversations don't begin with words. They start with silences. Long, loaded, and trembling with things unsaid. The next morning, Seattle was cloaked in fog so thick it softened even the sharpest edges of the skyline. Streetlights still blinked in the early light, casting long amber reflections on the wet pavement. Abby Caldwell stood in front of the building entrance 5 minutes before 8, her breath rising in faint clouds, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets. Inside, the lobby was nearly empty, save for the soft hum of the heater and the muted clicks of a receptionist's keyboard. The quiet felt reverent, like walking into a chapel before a service begins. She rode the elevator up alone. No music, just the soft whir of the mechanism and the echo of her heartbeat. When the doors opened to the executive floor, she paused for a breath before stepping out. The hallway was still. The same framed art, the same scent of wood polish, and something cooler beneath it, steel and silence. But something felt different, as if the air itself was waiting. She walked toward the familiar room at the end. The door was ajar this time, not closed tight like before. He was expecting her. When she entered, she was startled to find Thomas not behind his desk, but seated in one of the soft gray chairs near the corner of the room, the seating area meant for guests, for conversation, not for business. He looked up when she stepped in, but didn't stand, just gestured lightly toward the chair across from him. "Morning," he said softly. She returned the greeting, her voice low, unsure. There was a carafe of coffee on the small table between them, 2 white porcelain cups. He poured her one without asking how she took it, and to her surprise, got it right. No sugar, just a splash of cream. Abby sat slowly, her knees barely grazing the edge of the chair. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was full, measured. She watched him quietly, how his thumb circled the rim of his cup, how his eyes stayed on the rain-blurred skyline beyond the glass for a long beat before turning back to her. "I read it," he said finally. No need to explain what. They both knew. She lowered her eyes, the heat creeping into her face. He noticed. "I wasn't looking for it," he added. "It was just there. Open. On the table." Abby nodded once, still no words. He leaned back slightly in his seat, exhaled a slow breath. "I read things people write about me all the time. Reports, articles, reviews. But none of them ever felt honest. Not like that." She looked up, surprised. "There was something in your words," he continued, "about loneliness, about me." It was unsettling, because it wasn't wrong. His voice didn't shake, but there was a softness to it that she hadn't heard before. Not in board meetings, not in hallways. It wasn't vulnerability exactly. It was clarity, stripped of performance. "I never meant for you to read it," she said. "Finally, I know." Silence again, but this time it felt less like a wall and more like a doorway. He took another sip, then set his cup down. "You wrote about that project, the shoreline acquisition?" Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Yes, I've had doubts, too," he admitted. "But internally, it's complicated. There are people involved who wouldn't appreciate scrutiny." She hesitated. "So, you've been investigating?" He nodded, quietly, carefully. "But your note's what you observed. Even without access to full documents, it's remarkable. You see things most people overlook." There was a long pause, and then he said it. "I want you in the meeting this afternoon, with the internal ethics team." She blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "You don't have to speak. Just listen. Watch. Tell me afterward what you saw. You pick up on details, motives, nuances." Abby opened her mouth to protest. She was a temp, a secretary, someone who wasn't supposed to be in rooms like that. But then she met his eyes. He wasn't offering her a favor. He was offering her trust. "Why me?" she asked, softly. Thomas tilted his head. "Considering? Because you see what others miss." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said that to her before. People said she was quiet, efficient, pleasant, invisible, but never this. She nodded slowly, not trusting her voice to hold. He picked up his cup again. "We all hide things," he said, almost to himself. "You hide in your pages, I hide in glass." She looked at him, really looked. The man behind the glass wall was still there, composed, polished, restrained. But this morning, the glass was thinner, more fragile, more human. When she left the room, she didn't walk quickly. She didn't keep her head down. The hallway was still quiet, but inside her, something had shifted. This wasn't just a meeting invite. It wasn't just recognition. It was an opening, a crack in the armor of a man who'd built walls so high, no one dared look over. And somehow, in silence, she'd been handed the key. Sometimes, it's not the loud voices that change your life, it's the quiet warnings you almost ignore. By the second week of January, the fog outside the Rain and Ridge building seemed thicker, more reluctant to lift. Inside, The air in the office had changed, too subtle, like the scent of something beginning to burn before anyone notices smoke. Abby felt it in small ways first. A missed good morning from Denise. A pause too long when she entered the break room. The way conversation shifted whenever she walked past the copier. It wasn't overt. No one said anything unkind. But kindness itself began to vanish. She was still doing her work, in fact, more of it than ever. Thomas had given her quiet access to files most temps never saw. She spent evenings reviewing ethics protocols, timelines of acquisitions, inconsistencies in vendor contracts. She found things, patterns, threads, and he listened. He didn't praise her publicly, but in meetings, he'd glance toward her when something matched what she had pointed out in private. He asked her to sit in more sessions, take notes, ask questions never overtly, just enough. Enough to be seen. And being seen, it turned out, came at a cost. It was on a Thursday evening, long after the lights had dimmed and the elevators barely chimed, that Marcus Dean knocked gently on the edge of her cubicle. He had a kind face, mid-50s, pressed shirts, soft voice, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and knew which tea each assistant liked without asking. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You've been staying late," he said. Abby offered a tired smile, trying to keep up. He hesitated, then leaned in slightly, voice lower. "You should be careful." The words came out too casually, like a comment on the weather, but there was weight behind them. More than concern, something closer to warning. Abby blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked down the hallway before replying. "You're not the first woman he's pulled into his orbit." The sentence sat between them like spilled ink, dark, irreversible. Abby straightened in her chair. "It's not like that. I didn't say it was," Marcus replied, kindly. "But perception has its own power here. People talk, and talk, sticks." She looked away, throat tight. "I'm just doing the work he asked for." "I know," he said gently. "But someone else used to sit where you're sitting now. Sophia Langford, bright, quick, trusted." Abby's head turned sharply. What happened to her? Marcus gave a long, slow sigh. One day, she was everywhere. The next, she was gone, transferred out of state, high praise, big title, but she never came back. Where did she go? Texas? San Antonio office? Some new strategic division that no one ever heard from again? Abby felt her stomach turn. Marcus stepped back. "You're good, Abby. Just be careful what good makes you visible to." The next day was colder than usual. Even the building's heat couldn't quite chase away the chill that had settled into Abby's bones. She moved through her tasks mechanically, answering emails, updating files, taking notes during a morning call, but her thoughts kept drifting. Sophia. Had she written something? Too? Had she dared to get close by mid-afternoon? A sealed envelope was left on her desk, cream-colored, heavy stock, her name in ink, neat, formal, impersonal. She opened it slowly, hands trembling just enough to make the paper rustle. Rain and Ridge Partners, Office of Leadership Operations, internal memo, confidential subject, strategic relocation offer, dear Ms. Caldwell. In recognition of your recent contributions and growing involvement in cross-departmental initiatives, we are pleased to extend an offer for strategic relocation to our San Antonio branch. This opportunity includes promotion to Associate Administrative Director, relocation, stipend, immediate start. With training to begin next week, we believe your skill set is a valuable match for our expansion goals in Texas. Please respond by Friday at 5 p.m. Sincerely, Victoria Hartman, Executive Advisor. Abby's eyes scanned the letter 3 times, but the words didn't change. Strategic relocation, Texas, immediate start. Her heart dropped like a stone in her chest. It was written as a reward, but every line read like a dismissal. There had been no prior conversation, no consultation, no explanation, just gone, like Sophia. She looked across the room toward Victoria's office, blinds drawn, still, silent, then toward Thomas's. The door was open, but he wasn't inside. Had he known, had he approved it, or had it been done without him behind his glass wall, while others moved pieces he couldn't see? Her fingers clenched the edge of the letter, creasing it. Was this a promotion, or was it exile dressed as advancement? When the office emptied out that evening, Abby sat at her desk, the envelope still unopened beside her, though she had read the letter again and again. She looked out at the city, lights blinking in the dark, rain streaking across the windows. And for the first time in weeks, she felt utterly alone. Not the quiet kind of aloneness she had grown used to, not the comforting solitude of writing or walking through misty streets. This was the other kind, the cold kind, the kind that made you question what was real and what had only felt real for a little while. Her eyes dropped to the bottom of the page, her own name printed neatly, like it had already been packed up and moved elsewhere. Abby Caldwell, San Antonio. She folded the letter slowly, precisely, and slipped it back into the envelope. Her hands rested on it for a moment longer. And in the stillness of that empty office, only one thought remained. Was it ever real? Doubt doesn't arrive with thunder. It comes quietly, like mist, and before you know it, you're drowning in it. The envelope sat on Abby's desk like a wound. Its weight wasn't in the paper or ink, it was in what it implied. That her presence was temporary. That the doors she thought were opening might only have been revolving. She hadn't seen Thomas all morning. His office remained closed, the blinds drawn, no knocks, no messages, not even a glance in the hallway. She tried to work, she really did, but her hands kept trembling on the keyboard, her vision blurring between spreadsheet columns. Something inside her, something steady had started to crack. What had it all meant? The meetings, the trust, the quiet way he had looked at her across the room as if she mattered, were they anything more than strategy, a distraction, or worse, a pattern? She didn't want to believe it, but belief is a fragile thing when no one defends it. It was late afternoon when Victoria Hartman appeared. Abby hadn't heard her heels this time. They usually announced themselves a hallway before she arrived. But today, the advisor moved with something quieter, more precise. Victoria's expression was unreadable. As always, sculpted calm, with a glint of superiority tucked beneath. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, without waiting for permission. Abby gave a hesitant nod. Her hands folded themselves in her lap. Victoria sat, crossing one leg neatly over the other. Her tone was light, almost casual. "I received your transfer response. You haven't replied yet." Abby didn't speak. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "You know, Abby, you're not the first." Abby looked up, startled. "You're not the first he's brought close." Victoria continued, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. "You won't be the last. He has a type, quiet, observant, eager. Women who see his sadness and mistake it for substance." The words cut deeper than they should have. Maybe because Abby had thought the same things in the quiet of her own mind, but hearing them spoken aloud made them real. "Don't take it personally," Victoria added. "We all play our roles." Abby finally found her voice. "Are you saying he planned this?" Victoria smiled small, sharp. "I'm saying he's not new to the dance. But you're still learning the steps." She stood, brushing her coat sleeve. "Think about Texas. It's warmer there." And just like that, she was gone. The office felt colder after she left. Abby sat motionless for what felt like hours. Her mind filled with echoes, not memories, but questions. Had Thomas known about the letter? Had he asked Victoria to deliver it? Had any of this been real? The answer, if there was one, stayed silent. By 6 p.m., the office had emptied, desks dark, lights dimmed, the cleaning crew just beginning their quiet rituals. Abby stood slowly, gathered her things. She moved like someone walking through a dream, or maybe out of one. She didn't even realize she was heading to the elevator until the doors opened before her. Floor 15. Executive boardroom. She hadn't meant to press the button. Her hand had done it before her mind caught up. As she stepped out, voices stopped her, not loud, but close. Behind the half-open door of the glass conference room, Thomas's voice, and others. Abby froze, her back against the wall, breath shallow. We can't afford this kind of exposure again. A man said sharp, clipped, "She's not a liability." Thomas replied. His voice was low, firm. "She's already becoming one. First Sophia, now Abby. Do you see the pattern?" A pause. "She's different," Thomas said. Another voice. "You're too close. You always get too close. If you want to keep your position, this gets cleaned up, quietly." Silence followed, then footsteps. Abby stepped back into the shadow of the hallway, heart pounding in her throat. She didn't wait to hear more. She left the building like a ghost. The winter air slapped her face the moment she stepped outside. Rain threatened in the sky, low and gray, but hadn't yet fallen. Cars hissed by. A dog barked in the distance. She walked without direction, the cold biting through her coat, the words replaying over and over. If you want to keep your position, this gets cleaned up. Had it ever been about her work, or had she been collateral? She reached a bus stop, but didn't get on, just sat on the bench, her fingers gripping the cold metal edge, knuckles white. She thought of Maddie, of her mother, of everything she had fought for: stability, dignity, purpose. Was she going to run again? Accept the envelope and disappear like Sophia? She looked down at her bag, at the corner of the diary peeking out. Her father's handwriting still on the first page. "Speak when it's hard. That's when it matters." She stood, not because she had answers, but because she was tired of being pushed into silence. Abby turned around and began walking back, not home, but toward the building she had just left, back toward the office, back toward the truth. Truth doesn't always knock. Sometimes it hides in the walls, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. The hallways of Rain and Ridge were nearly empty by the time Abby slipped back inside. Most of the lights had dimmed to motion sensor levels, casting long, cool shadows along the carpeted floors. The elevator let out a soft ding, but no one stepped out. No one saw her return. Her hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. She knew where she was going, not to her desk, not to Thomas's office, but down 2 flights to a rarely used corridor near IT services. Behind a discreet gray door, half concealed by a cleaning supplies cabinet, was a small room she'd passed once during an office move. It wasn't locked. The internal sound system was housed there, a mix of ancient and modern dusty control boards, fiber optic lines, and touchscreen monitors. This was where all internal audio feeds ran through: conference calls, meeting room backups, intercom systems. She pushed the door open, half expecting an alarm. Nothing, just a hum, soft, mechanical, low. She slipped inside and shut the door gently behind her. The room was cold, the kind of cold that didn't just come from temperature, but from stillness, the kind no one disturbed. Dust clung to the edges of the monitor stands. A single desk lamp cast a cone of yellow light over the main console. Abby sat down slowly, her breath shallow. On the screen, she navigated through the system menu like she had once, long ago, during a temp training week. The backup logs were automated. Every conference room had its own feed. She found the right room, timestamped 2 hours earlier. Board meeting. She hit play, slipped on the headphones, and listened. At first, only static, a shuffle of papers, a throat being cleared, then Thomas's voice firm, quieter than usual. "We can't move forward with Shoreline until the discrepancies are resolved. This is non-negotiable." Another voice clipped, older. "Do you understand what you're jeopardizing by delaying this? Investors are restless. Expansion requires momentum." Thomas again. "And integrity." A third voice chimed in, lower, smoother. Abby recognized it. Gerald Price. "We're not here to discuss ethics. We're here to talk strategy." Thomas replied colder now. Strategy that conceals financial misrepresentation isn't strategy. It's fraud. There was a pause. Long, heavy. Then the voice she dreaded, Victoria. If you continue this line of resistance, Thomas, the board will take action. We've already had inquiries from external parties interested in leadership alternatives. Abby's hands tightened on the edge of the desk. Another voice, unidentified. Let's not pretend this hasn't happened before. Whitaker's emotional entanglements are well documented. First Sophia, now Abby. She has nothing to do with this, Thomas snapped, but the silence that followed was worse than any denial. Gerald again, quieter this time. You were warned, Thomas. You had your chance to play along. Now we're moving forward, with or without you. Click. The audio ended. Abby sat frozen. The room around her felt impossibly still. The only sound was the soft whir of the ceiling vent and the sharp thudding of her own heartbeat. It was real, everything she feared, every whisper, every shift in tone. They were not just imagining things, they were orchestrating them. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small USB stick, one she kept for backup resumes, emergency files. Her fingers shook slightly as she saved the audio file. Boardroom, confidential, WAV. She watched the transfer bar move slowly across the screen. At 100%, she exhaled as if she hadn't taken a full breath since entering the room. She pulled the USB free, slipped off the headphones, and stood. And that's when she turned and saw him. Marcus stood in the doorway, quiet as a statue. Abby's eyes widened. He looked not surprised, not angry, just sad. His eyes dropped to the USB in her hand. There was a silence between them, thick, filled with the weight of things neither wanted to say aloud. Marcus spoke first, his voice low, but clear. Do you even know who you're protecting? Abby didn't answer right away. The question echoed in her mind. Thomas Whitaker, the man who gave her chances, the man who kept things from her, the man who might be fighting for truth or just protecting his power. She looked at Marcus, and though her voice stayed still, her eyes carried her answer. I know enough, she said quietly, and I know I can't let this stay hidden. Marcus nodded slowly. Not an agreement, but an acknowledgement. As if he knew what it meant, what it could cost. He stepped aside, letting her pass. Abby walked down the hallway, USB clenched in her fist like a compass. She didn't know what the next step was, but she knew this. She was no longer running, and the truth was no longer silent. Some truths don't come through words spoken, they arrive in words written, long ago, and hidden away until the right eyes find them. It was just past midnight when Abby reached her apartment. The rain had followed her home, quiet but steady, tapping softly against the window panes like a heartbeat trying to be heard. The kind of rain Seattle knew well, gray, gentle, and unrelenting. Maddie was asleep, curled beneath a faded quilt in the next room. The low hum of her white noise machine buzzed faintly through the cracked door. Abby's mother had gone to bed early too, her breathing steady from down the hallway. Abby moved through the apartment in silence. She didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the small lamp on the kitchen counter, casting a golden circle over the worn tile and stacks of mail. She placed her bag down, took off her coat, sat at the table, and there it was, a small, pale envelope with her name in clean, deliberate handwriting, no postage, no return address, just her name. She'd found it a few days earlier in her inbox, wedged between reports, contracts, and unread requests. There'd been no note, no explanation, only the initials T, W, penciled faintly on the back flap. At the time, she hadn't had the courage to open it, but now, after everything she needed to know, her hands moved slowly, carefully, as if the paper itself might shatter. She slit the envelope open with a butter knife and pulled out a single folded page and paused. The handwriting was not Thomas's. Abby, if you're reading this, it means you've been pulled into the same undertow I once was. I'm sorry. truly. But I also believe you're stronger than I was, that you might finish what I couldn't. My name is Sophia Langford. I'm not who they said I was. Not the whisper, not the scandal, not the fool who fell for a man above her station. Thomas was never my lover. He was my ally, my comrade in something we never dared speak of aloud, the truth. Abby's fingers tightened on the page. Years ago, I discovered discrepancies in the shoreline expansion, irregular numbers, hidden funds. At first, I brought it to Gerald, thinking it was an error. But then, I saw the pattern. It wasn't just financial, it was systemic. Thomas believed me. He asked me to gather evidence, quietly, carefully, but we didn't move fast enough. Someone tipped them off. I was offered a promotion to Texas, same as you, a reward. Really, it was exile. My silence bought with a title. I took it, but I left behind every document I could, buried it deep, hoping someone else would dig. If you're reading this, you must be that someone. They'll try to turn you into a shadow, tell you it's protection, tell you it's strategy. Don't believe them. Don't go quietly. Thomas is not perfect, but he's still fighting. Maybe this time, he won't have to fight alone. Don't disappear. Abby, stay loud. Sophia. The room went silent, not from sound, but from breath, the way a moment empties itself out to make room for something heavier. Abby read the letter again, and again. Each sentence unfolded like a long, sealed truth, preserved in ink and time. So much made sense now. The tension in Thomas's eyes, his refusal to speak ill of Sophia, though everyone else had, the envelope, quietly left. The way he'd looked at Abby not like a pawn or a liability, but like someone he hoped might understand. She wasn't a replacement, she wasn't a mistake, she was a continuation. A thread picked up from the hands of a woman who had refused to vanish without a trace. Abby let out a long, shaky breath. Her fingers trembled slightly as she folded the letter again, more carefully this time, like it had become something sacred. She walked to her bedroom and opened the drawer beside her bed. Inside, beneath a stack of old receipts and expired coupons, was the leather-bound diary, edges worn, corners softened by years of touch. She placed the letter inside the back cover. Then, slowly, she opened to the last page. There, in faded ink, was the last thing she had written. The night she thought everything was coming undone. She picked up a pen, the same one she used every night, a cheap blue ballpoint with a cracked cap, and hovered over the page. No tears came, just breath, slow, certain. She wrote, "This time, I won't disappear, not quietly." She closed the book, set the pen down, and sat in stillness, her hand resting over the cover like a vow. There comes a time when silence becomes complicity, and for Abby, that moment had arrived. The boardroom on the top floor of Rain and Ridge was unusually full that morning. 12 chairs, one long glass table, a skyline behind them wrapped in pale, reluctant light. Abby stood just outside the room with Marcus. Her hands were clasped, but steady. The USB sat in her coat pocket, the diary in her bag, and Sophia's letter tucked carefully between the pages like a talisman. She wore navy today, not black, not gray, a color with quiet strength. The door opened. Inside, the members of the board murmured in low voices. Coffee cups clinked softly. Gerald Price sat at the head of the table, confident, unreadable. Victoria sat 2 chairs down, legs crossed, fingers moving smoothly over her phone screen. They both looked up at the same time when Abby entered, and their gazes sharpened like cold knives drawn from velvet. Thomas was already in the room. He didn't greet her with a smile, no reassuring nod. He didn't need to. His presence alone, calm and immovable, was enough. He stood beside the empty chair next to his, the one she now knew was meant for her. Abby took it. Marcus remained standing behind her, a quiet sentinel. The meeting began. Standard greetings, agenda points, a performance of professionalism. Then Thomas spoke only a few words. There are items that have come to light. Abby will present them. Every head turned, some surprised, some skeptical, but Abby didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and placed the USB on the table, then the diary, then a printout of Sophia's letter. This recording, she said, was taken from the internal sound system during a closed-door meeting between several members of this board and Mr. Whitaker. A pause. A few brows rose. Contained in it, she continued, is clear evidence of manipulation, coercion, and financial misconduct being concealed under the guise of expansion. Gerald leaned back in his chair. And where? Exactly. Did you obtain this? Abby met his eyes. From your own system? You were careless. A murmur rippled across the room. Victoria spoke next, her voice smooth as glass. This is highly irregular. She's a temp. Abby didn't blink. Until I became a witness. She passed copies of transcripts, financial reports with circled discrepancies, Sophia's letter, now public for the first time, page by page. Truth was laid bare like threads unspooled from a long-hidden loom. No one spoke. The room grew colder as each detail cut deeper. The paper rustled like dry leaves in a dead forest. A cough, a shifting of chairs. Abby stood to finish. You tried to erase us, she said, her voice low but unwavering. You buried Sophia. You tried to exile me. But here we are. She stepped closer to the table, fingertips grazing the cover of her diary. We're the ink that doesn't wash away. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was impact. Victoria folded her arms. This is theater. Abby turned toward her. Then let the facts take the stage. Thomas finally stepped forward. He didn't look at Gerald or Victoria, only at the rest of the board. I didn't authorize her actions, he said, but I stand by them, fully. A few heads nodded. Gerald's face darkened. You've made a mistake, he said, both of you. Thomas responded evenly. No, we corrected one. The vote came next, quick, quiet, 9 members, one by one. Gerald suspended. Pending formal investigation. Victoria placed under review. No shouting, no outbursts, just the sound of power shifting quiet as snowfall. The meeting adjourned. No one lingered. Gerald gathered his briefcase slowly, as if the weight of it had doubled. He didn't look at Abby as he passed her. Victoria paused near the door, her mask still perfect. She leaned in slightly. You won this round. Don't get comfortable. Abby met her gaze, calm, unmoved. I'm not looking for comfort, just truth. Victoria left. The room emptied, bit by bit, and then it was just Abby and Thomas. He turned to her, eyes thoughtful. Thank you, he said. She shook her head gently. It was overdue. He offered a small, tired smile. And now, he looked around at the empty seats, at the silence left behind. We rebuild. Some people chase titles. Others earn them when they stand for what matters. The next morning, Abby arrived at Rain and Ridge just before sunrise. The building, so often wrapped in sterile stillness, felt different now. Not louder, just less hollow. Like it had taken a breath. Like something had finally been named, and in the naming, released. The glass doors hissed open. She stepped inside. No fanfare, no applause, just the quiet click of her heels on polished floors, the familiar hum of lights warming up, and the scent of coffee already drifting from the break room. She liked it that way. Let the world move on. Let healing begin in small, unspoken ways. Thomas found her an hour later. He knocked gently on the doorframe of the small corner room she'd taken over. Not quite an office, not quite a workspace, just a desk, a chair, a window, and shelves that had begun to fill with case notes, compliance forms, and 3 potted plants she refused to name. Got a minute? He asked. She nodded, setting down her pen. He stepped in and closed the door behind him. For a moment, they didn't speak. There was no rush now, no ticking clock. Just a moment, shared by 2 people who had survived the storm together. Then he placed a folder in front of her. Board approved it this morning, he said. Unanimous vote. Abby raised an eyebrow. He tapped the front label. Director of Cultural and Ethical Integrity, Abigail Caldwell. She stared at it, not with excitement, not with pride, but with the quiet gravity of someone who knew what it had cost. I didn't ask for this, she said softly. I know, Thomas replied. That's why it's yours. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers brushed the edge of the folder. Her reflection blinked back at her from the glass-framed diploma someone had hung on the wall. Her name, etched now in a new space. But what mattered more was that it had come not from ambition, but from alignment between her heart and her actions. I'm not a fixer, she murmured. I'm just someone who saw too much to stay quiet. Thomas's voice was steady. Sometimes, that's exactly who needs to lead. Later that day, Marcus stopped by with a smile and a brown paper bag. Cranberry muffins, he said. Your favorite, right? She chuckled. How do you even know that I pay attention? He winked. Congratulations, Director. Her laugh faded into a softer smile. Thank you, she said, and meant it not just for the muffins. Before leaving, Marcus hesitated in the doorway. You did good, Abby. You didn't just speak up, you stayed. She nodded slowly. For the first time, I wanted to. That afternoon, her inbox chimed. One unread message, subject, from one who didn't disappear. Sender Sophia Langford. Location Boston Consulting Group, Independent Ethics Division. Abby opened it. Abby, heard the news. I'm not surprised, just deeply proud. You turned what broke you into something that built others. That's rare. When you're ready, there's a community of us, the ones who didn't go quietly. I hope someday you'll join us. But for now, breathe. You've earned that much? Abby smiled slow, real. She closed the email and let herself sit in silence for a long while, watching the afternoon sun move across the carpet like time itself softening. It was nearing sunset when Thomas appeared again. This time, he didn't knock. He simply stepped inside, holding something small in his hand. Her pen, the one she'd left in the boardroom by accident. I believe this belongs to you. She took it, amused. You could have emailed. He didn't smile, not quite. Just looked at her in that way he always had, as though he were still searching for the words that never quite found him in time. Then, after a pause, he said quietly, I no longer want to lead without you beside me in the company. And in life, the air between them shifted, not heavier, just fuller. Abby didn't answer right away. She stood, slipped on her coat, picked up the folder with her new title and placed it back in the drawer, then turned to him. Let's start with a walk, she said gently. Just the two of us. And together, without ceremony, they stepped out not into certainty, but into something better, beginning again. But this time, not alone. Every story has an end, but the ones worth remembering always leave room for a new beginning. Spring had returned to Seattle not loudly, but gently, like someone easing into a room they have been away from too long. The air was soft again. The rain had thinned to a lazy drizzle. Trees along the street stretched green fingers toward the sky, and flowers bloomed in corners where no one had planted them, as if the earth itself had decided healing was long overdue. Abby sat on the small balcony of Thomas's townhouse, her legs tucked beneath her, a new journal resting on her knees. The leather was smooth and uncreased, untouched, but not for long. She uncapped her pen, took a deep breath, and began to write. 6 months ago, I lost a diary. I thought I'd lost a piece of myself with it. Maybe I had, but it turns out that's how most journeys begin, not with gaining, but with losing. Since then, I've learned to speak in rooms that once silenced me. I've learned that truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives on paper, or in a voice you almost missed. And I've learned that the scariest part of being seen is also the most beautiful. The pen paused. A breeze rustled through the balcony plants, carrying the soft scent of lavender and damp stone. Somewhere below, a dog barked and a child laughed. Life was still happening messy, unpredictable, uninvited, and somehow, that was comforting. Abby looked up as the glass door behind her slid open. Thomas stepped out, holding 2 mugs. "Still like it?" "Black?" he asked. She smiled. "Always." He handed her the cup and sat beside her in the wooden chair that creaked like it had been waiting just for him. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer filled with questions or things unsaid. It was simply shared space, quiet, warm, known. She glanced sideways. His hair was a little longer now. The lines around his eyes had softened. He still carried the weight of leadership, but it no longer looked like burden, more like something he had chosen and no longer carried alone. He caught her looking. What, he asked, grinning slightly. She shook her head, smiling. "Nothing. Just glad you're here." He raised his mug slightly, a small toast. "Likewise." Back inside, the house was filled with signs of a new life, unfolding papers on the dining table, notepads full of future plans. A recipe book open to a page marked Maddie's favorite pancakes. An old photograph of Sophia and Abby at a conference in Boston, arms around each other, eyes bright with shared fire. Sophia had visited twice in the last few months. They'd laughed more than cried. They talked about ethics, yes, but also about shoes, bad coffee, and how not all goodbyes are permanent. Marcus, too, had found his rhythm again. He'd accepted a promotion, but still stopped by Abby's office every Friday with a new pastry and a joke that never quite landed. Abby's mother had stabilized her heart stronger, her voice steadier. And Maddie. She was thriving, drawing pictures of Mama's new job and asking endless questions about what integrity meant. Abby had tried to explain it once, fumbling through definitions. Maddie had simply said, "So it's like being kind," but with a backbone that felt right. Abby turned another page in her journal. Her handwriting had changed slightly over the years, softer, slower, as if the rush to prove something had given way to the desire to understand it instead. She wrote, "I used to think surviving meant disappearing less loudly. Now I know it means staying, and being seen, especially when it's hardest." She looked out over the city skyline, bathed now in golden light. Seattle in spring didn't shout, it whispered, and somehow, that was enough. Thomas shifted beside her. "You still writing that thing every day?" he asked. She nodded. "It keeps me honest." He took a sip of coffee, then set the mug down and leaned back. "You've changed the company," he said. She tilted her head. Maybe I just reminded it who it was supposed to be." He looked at her. Really looked, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she closed the journal, ran her fingers over the cover, whispered, more to herself than him, "I lost a diary, but I found myself." He reached for her hand. She let him take it, and together, they sat as the sun dipped lower, the world exhaling into evening. Finally. Abby opened the journal to the very first page. In the top corner, she wrote, "To truth, to us." Then she smiled, not because the story was over, but because it was hers now. And somewhere in the quiet, a new page waited. Sometimes, the most powerful moments in life come not from grand gestures, but from quiet courage. This story reminds us that truth, no matter how small or hidden, has a way of rising. Abby never sought power, titles, or recognition. All she did was speak up, when staying silent would have been easier. And in doing so, she not only changed her life, but protected others along the way. It's a lesson for all of us. Even when you feel small, unheard, or unseen, your voice matters. Even when you're afraid, choosing what's right can leave a mark that doesn't fade. For anyone who's ever felt overlooked or underestimated, Abby's journey shows that strength isn't loud sometimes. It writes quietly in the margins and still finds its way to the center of the page. Because at the end of the day, living truthfully with integrity and grace is what gives our story meaning. and it's never too late to start a new page. Thank you for taking the time to walk through this story with us. If it touched your heart, even in a small way, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that we're never alone in what we feel. See you in the next story, where another quiet voice is waiting to be heard.